Hi there and welcome to another video. This is Jennifer Mcguire and I appreciate you stopping by today. I'm really excited about today's video. A few weeks ago, I shared a technique that I called Distress Ink Monoprint, where you used heat embossing in Distress Ink to create two backgrounds at once. I'll link it here in the top right in case you missed it. However, today I'm doing a variation of that technique, and this time we're using die cutting for a Distress Ink Monoprint. Now this really isn't monoprint, it's more of a faux monoprint, but I wasn't really sure what else to call it. Basically, you're applying lots of Distress Ink to one piece that has die cutting, spraying it with water, and then smushing it against plain white cardstock to create another background. Really easy to do and such a great way to get more out of your die cuts. I have lots of examples for you today, so hopefully you'll find a technique that you can try with dies that you may have. Let's start with these cards first. I'm using regular white cardstock. This is Neenah Classic Crest Solar White, and I'm using mini Distress Ink pads. You can use regular Distress Ink pads and an ink blending tool if you prefer, but I find it super fast to just take these mini inks and spread the ink directly onto the paper. You can see I'm not taking time to blend these colors together. It's really not necessary for this technique. If you only have the full ink pads, you can use those too. It's just that these minis are easy to apply direct to paper. If you don't have distress inks, you could use distress oxide inks for this, or any other dye ink that reacts with water. Once I've covered it with a lot of ink, as much as I can, I'm using this awesome new Simon's Stamp Outline Floral Frame die to die cut it. I'm using Heffy Doodle Memo tape to hold my die to the paper. I'm really liking that tape, and I'll talk about it more in a future video. After I've run it through my die cut machine, I can pop out all the little bits and pieces, and you can see the fun rainbow effect we have here. Next, I'm going to take another piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to tape it to the other piece that we've inked and die cut. So you can see I'm just taping right along the top there. I'm creating a temporary hinge that I can do this technique with. This is kind of like what we did in the other video. So now I'm going to take this and open it up, and I'll put some scrap paper behind it or a cloth, and then scrap paper to cover our plain white piece. And I'm going to spray this inked die cut with lots of water, a pretty generous amount. You can see how much I'm spritzing on here. And make sure you get all areas of that wet. Now I'm going to take this and run it through my die cut machine. You can do this with any die cut machine. Just put it between your cutting plates as if you were using a die and paper to die cut. Instead, we're not die cutting, we're just smushing these two pieces together. Once you're done, you can carefully pull the pieces apart and check it out. Some of that wet ink from the die cut transferred onto our plain white cardstock, giving us two pieces that we can use for two different cards. And that white cardstock where we pressed that ink onto from the die cut, it actually has a little bit of an impression from that die cut shape too. It's beautiful in real life. So let's create the cards. For the card with the colorful piece, I actually die cut two more outline frames, glued them behind it for a stacked look, and now I'm gluing it onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. For sentiment, I used the older Simon's Stamp Big Thanks dies and the Big Thanks stamp set. I use these a few times throughout this video. These are classics that I reach for often. Now remember before I had this large negative space that's inked that was left over from the die cutting. I actually sprayed it with the water and ran it through the die cut machine with a piece of white cardstock, and it transferred some of the ink to that too. So now I have two pieces from which I can die cut the word thanks, and it'll perfectly match the two cards that I've created. So that top card on the left is the die cut itself, and this card here on the bottom is the impression that we made when we did that faux monoprint technique. When I add my thanks die cut, I'm using my T-ruler to make sure that I get it centered and straight. I find that super helpful because sometimes I like to put things on crooked by accident. Now I'm using my Misty and the sentiment stamp from the Big Thanks stamp set and stamping that with black ink right underneath the die cut. And I did the same thing on both cards. I also added a few iridescent jewels to the backgrounds just for a little bit of sparkle. Here's the first card where we use the die cut, and you can see where I stacked the die cuts for dimensional look. You don't need to stack the die cuts, but it really does add some great dimension. Now the second card where we made that impression or transferred the ink from the die cut, you can see it's a little bit softer, but it's such a beautiful look. And remember, the die cut does leave a tiny impression onto this piece. Now I have a bunch of examples in this video. However, I wanted to do one more using that same floral outline die. In this case, I started with white cardstock, and I'm pressing a bunch of different teal colored inks onto it. So I've got cracked pistachio, evergreen bough, and pine needles. You can see it really doesn't matter if you blend the colors. You just want to get as much ink down onto the paper as possible. Then I'll use that same die to die cut it. Now this time, instead of using just water for the technique, I decided to use pearlized water. So this will give us some shimmer. These are perfect pearls, which are a pigment powder. And I'm adding a few scoops into a full bottle of water, full mist bottle. And I'm using my bead tray to scoop it. Now, I have had a bottle with perfect pearl water in it for a long time, and I decided to recently switch to a distress sprayer since it's bigger, and I found that you can store it this way without having to worry about clogging the bottle. So now I need to create that taped hinge between our inked die cut piece and our piece of plain cardstock. This time I'm using a soft pool cardstock. I'm spraying the inked die cut piece with that pearlized water that we just created, pressing the two pieces together and running it through the die cut machine. That purple tape hinge simply allows the pieces to not shift when we're going through the die cut machine. When you do this technique, you actually end up with two pieces that are mirror images of each other. Instead of using them on different cards, I thought I'd use them together. And you can see some of the background image showing through the die cut. So I die cut two more from the same die, glued it behind our inked piece for dimension, and then added that onto our background. I added a Simon Says stamp CZ Design Hello die cut. I actually die cut 3 from white cardstock and glued them together for that stacked look, and glued it to the center and stamped a sentiment from the Tiny Word stamp set, which I'll show you in a moment, right below it. I also added a few jewels and added it to a white note card. Here you can see that impressed background that we created behind our die cut, and it creates a fun layered look. Okay, here's another example. This time I used a wide border die, just to show you that this technique works with many different types of dies. I'm starting by inking up my white cardstock very heavily with Distress ink. I will then use the new Simon Says stamp wrought iron wide border die to die cut from the inked piece. I'll end up with this beautiful intricate piece, and I'm going to tape it right up against a piece of white cardstock, just creating a hinge so they don't shift when I run it through my die cut machine. You really don't have to create this hinge, and I'll show you in a few examples later on in this video that you can carefully place it without the hinge. So you have both options. So once I have my hinge here in place, I can go ahead and spray just the inked die cut itself, covering up the white piece. You want to make sure you cover that up. It gives better results. Now I'll go ahead and put this between my two cutting plates, run it through my die cut machine, and we'll transfer some of the ink from our die cut because that die cut is wet and we've reactivated that ink, and it'll transfer onto our white cardstock, giving us two beautiful pieces. Using the inked die cut piece, I created a card by stacking a few additional white die cuts behind it. Stacking die cuts really makes a card stand out. For the sentiment, I used the word hugs that I created with the new Simon Says stamp rounded alphabet die set, and I am crazy about this die set. These letters are the perfect size, and all you need to do is start in the center of your word and work your way out. So I put the UG in the center and then put the HS next to that. I also added a few gemstones to that just for a bit of sparkle. A simple card, didn't take too long to make, and I like that I can personalize whatever sentiment I want on it using that alphabet die set. Now with the other piece where we made the impression, I just trimmed it down and added it to a white note card also. I used the new Simon Says Stamp You're Doing Awesome die for this. This is a new sentiment die that they have, and I just love it. You can do You're Doing Awesome or just the word awesome alone if you prefer. Okay, I have one more example showing how to use intricate dies for this die cut monoprint technique. Then we'll move on to some background techniques. For these two particular cards, I use the new Simon Says Stamp Deco Heart die set. This die set includes this solid outline heart here, and then the intricate heart that you see on the right. I traced the heart onto my white cardstock, so I knew how big of an area to apply my ink. I'm very generously applying my distress ink in different shades of pinks and purples, so I have Seedless Preserves, Dusty Concord, and Picked Raspberry, and I ran it through my die cut machine with the intricate heart die. I sprayed it with my Shimmer water that I made with Perfect Pearls. And in this case, I'm using my tweezers to pick up that wet die cut and place it right onto the white cardstock in my die cut machine before I run it through. So I didn't do a hinge today, but I was very careful to lay the wet die cut onto the white cardstock and not allow it to move. I have an important tip for you here. If you have a wet die cut like this one that's very intricate, it's best to heat set it to dry it before trying to remove it from the white cardstock. If you try to remove it when it's wet, it might tear. So just heat setting it with a heat gun or setting it aside to dry for a while makes a huge difference. And you can see how the ink transferred beautifully. Now I have two hearts that I can use on two cards. For the first card, I'm actually creating a clear window on the front of my card, and then I'll add our inked die cut on top. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Center Cut Heart Stamp. This one has a heart that comes out of the center, so you can stamp them together or separately. And they actually match up with the heart dies that I used on today's example. I heat embossed that heart stamp background onto purple cardstock with white pearl embossing powder. This pearl embossing powder just gives a metallic look against that colored cardstock. I'm using the solid heart to die cut the window right onto that heat embossed panel. I then have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and I'm going to die cut that heart in the same exact spot. So I line my panel up on the front of the card, line the die up right into the opening, tape it in place, and run it through my die cut machine again. And now I will have a heart cut on our purple panel and the front of our white note card in the exact same place. Now I can add a piece of acetate between these two pieces to create that window. So I put some strong adhesive around that heart opening on the white card. I'm laying some scrap acetate that I got from some packaging right onto that adhesive. I then put adhesive around the back side of that purple piece, and I'll lay that on top, sandwiching the acetate piece between the note card and the purple piece. So now I have this fun window in the front of our card that allows you to see to the inside of the card. I have my inked heart die cut that we used for our technique, and I'm gluing that right onto that clear window so it floats there. This is just something fun and unexpected to do, and a great way to get more from your die cuts. Here's the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words stamp set that I mentioned earlier. This is packed full with lots of tiny sentiments, covering just about any occasion you could need. These are the new Simon Says Stamp Nested Banner dies. These are great. There are lots of different dies in here. You just need to cut them apart with wire cutters. And you can see the two small banner dies that I'm using over on the right. But I like that there are lots of sizes, even larger banner dies in this. So I use those dies to die cut some banner strips, one with little ribbon flag ends, and this one that has the rounded edges, which I really like. And I stamped one of the tiny word sentiments right in the center. I decided not to add anything else to this card because I felt like it had enough going on already. Now the second card also uses the Simon Says Stamp Center Cut Heart stamp on the background. But instead I used white cardstock and that pearl embossing powder on the white. This gives a very subtle background with a bit of interest and allows the attention to stay on that monoprint heart that we created in the center. Okay, I actually have one more example showing how to use intricate dies for this technique. I just was crazy about a lot of these new Simon Says stamp dies, so I made a bunch of cards. The fun thing about this technique is you get two backgrounds from one technique, so you can make lots of cards pretty quickly. I'm once again starting with white cardstock and applying a generous amount of Distress ink. I then am using the new Simon Says stamp Sweet Tulip die to die cut from this colorful piece, and you can see the intricate result we get with beautiful colors. I'm spraying this piece generously with that pearlized water that I created. You could use regular water if you want, and carefully picking it up with tweezers and laying it onto white cardstock before running it through my die cut machine. We'll transfer the ink onto the other piece, and here you can get an idea of how you end up with mirror results. I'm heat setting it so that the die cut releases from the paper without tearing, and there you see the mirror results that you get. You could use these two pieces on one card, but I want to make as many cards as I can, so I created two. I just glued those pieces onto a white note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I added the same thanks die cut to both. I did stack these die cuts by gluing more white die cuts behind it, but again, you could always just glue those directly to the card if you want to save the time. Here's the thanks dies that I used for the cards. It's the Simon Says stamp CZ Designed Thanks die set. It has the word thanks and the shadow die, so I layered those together so it would stand out more. Okay, now let's do some examples of this technique where we ink the entire background and just die cut a portion from it. I'm starting with a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of white cardstock and generously applying blue and green distress inks. From the top center of the piece, I'm using the Simon Says stamp Wreath die to die cut a little window, and then I'll create a hinge with another piece of white cardstock of the same size. We'll spray the inked portion once again, and I'm using the pearlized water, so this will have lots of shimmer to it. I'll close this up, put it through the die cut machine to just squish them together, and you'll see that the ink transfers. Now, I didn't use enough water. You got to think there's a lot of ink on this, so you want to use a little more water. That's okay. You can just repeat the process to transfer more color. So if you're ever finding that not much ink is transferring and you're not getting much color on your plain white piece, you can repeat the process again. And there we got much better transfer that time. You can also see how the water that we spray on it helps to blend the colors together, so we don't have to take the time to do it when we're inking the paper. For my first card, I'm using one of the backgrounds and the new Simon Says stamp Friend Outline die. You can see the die on the bottom right there. It cuts the letters and the outline of the letters, so you have lots of options. I decided to use them together. I temporarily taped my negative space onto my card so I could perfectly position each of those letters into the openings. Once I have them in place and press them down firmly, I can remove the negative space and all my letters are perfectly positioned. I did also add a few little pearls to the wreath, but besides that, I kept this card very simple. This is the second piece, the piece where we transferred the ink onto, and you can see the colors very vibrant. And we have the shimmer on the background thanks to the pearlized water that I used for the technique. And here is the original inked piece, and on this one I went with a Hello die cut. This is actually part of an older Simon Says stamp die. The die itself says "Oh hello" there, but I just used the hello alone and die cut it 3 times from white cardstock and glued them together. So you can see this technique works great for backgrounds even. Here's another example of backgrounds, another one that's very quick to do. I'm applying lots of pink and purple distress inks to my white cardstock. You really can use any colors together. That's a nice thing about distress inks. They all kind of blend well together and you always get good results. I'm die cutting from it a Simon Says stamp Shimmer Burst die, kind of towards the top left. I hinged some white cardstock onto it. I'm misting this up with pearlized water very generously. And then I will run that through my die cut machine. And let's see how well that ink transferred. Sometimes with backgrounds you need to repeat this process twice, and sometimes you don't. In this case it transferred very well, so I'm just going to go with this, and we have 2 backgrounds made very quickly. I trimmed the panels down and put them onto note cards that are 5 1/2 inches tall, but only 3 1/4 inches wide. That way my thanks sentiment can hang off the side and it'll still fit in my envelope. I used the Big Thanks dies and the Big Thanks stamp set once again on these. I just layered them together and added glossy accents to the top of the die cut for some shine. And you can see this has a lot of shimmer on the background thanks to the perfect pearls that we put in the water. And look how beautifully blended that is, even though I didn't have to take the time to do it. That's the joy of using water and techniques like this with distress inks. Okay, I have one more pair of examples for you, and this time I'm actually using a background die, and it works great for this technique. As always, I'm starting with white cardstock, applying a generous amount of distress ink, and then I'll use this new Simon Says Stamp background die to die cut from our inked piece. After doing this, I'm convinced that this technique is great for background dies, another way to get more out of the dies that you may have. Okay, so I have my background die cut. I'm going to mist it generously with the pearlized water, and I'm going to pick this up carefully with my tweezers, and then I'll lay it right on top of a piece of white cardstock in my die cut machine and run it through. I could have done the hinge, but I wanted to have a white trim around the edge of the piece that we transfer the ink to. Really, it doesn't matter how you do it, you just don't want to move the two pieces once they've touched. And when I peel them apart, look at that beautiful ink transfer. I only had to do it once, I think because I added enough of the water the first time. Here are the two completed cards. I added them onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. I also added lots of pearls to the pattern in the background. It's hard to see in the video, but this die does have a pierced pattern along with the die cut holes that's just beautiful. I added that CZ Designs Thanks die cut and also a little sentiment underneath it from the Big Thanks stamp set that I showed you earlier. Now this is the piece that we applied the ink to and sprayed, and this one has the piece where we transferred the ink to. Even though it's slightly lighter, it still does show that pattern, and you can see that it gives great results. So there you have it, another way to use distress inks for a faux monoprint, where you end up getting 2 cards out of 1 inked die cut. I hope you'll give this a try. It really is easy to do and can be used with most any die you have. I link all of the supplies that I used to shops in my description below. You can also check out these other 2 videos in the middle for more ideas. And please go to my blog because I have lots of information there, including photos of all of these cards. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon.